Hi, my name is Marcus Wiley, and this is my speech over Abilene, Texas. I've been an Abilenian for 14 years, and I asked myself, what do I really know about Abilene, Texas? I know there's two schools that despise each other, a north and a south, and they're separated by railroad tracks that have made Abilene what it is today. I asked myself, who are the founding fathers? What did they do to make Abilene the way it is today? The simple life is an everyday life in Abilene, Texas, and if you've lived here, you know what I mean. Abilene has been a low-key town for many years, and the people that pass through it have never really noticed the historic beauty it has to offer. But after this, they will have newfound interest for their little town. The beginning would be rather hard, but everyone was ready for it. The beginning of the future great city. According to Fane Downs, January 1st, 1876 would be the last battle for the Indians, and it would open up the West County for settlement. This would make possible for the T&P railways to lay down some tracks. The founding fathers, Horace Withers, Claiborne John Merchant, John Berry, and Samuel Chalk, would plan out the city. To get the city going, they'd have to auction off some land, which would go really well. Ideally, the terrain wasn't perfect, and the odds were against the town. According to Robert E. Gabler, rainfall was hard to come by, and any year they received more would be a blessing. In the words of Robert Sledge, Abilene was a conflagration waiting to happen, but it didn't have to wait long. Having fires, you need water, which was a problem for Abilene, considering they were always on a dry spell. Getting the population would be a challenge that they were willing to take on. Abilene would want to reach the 25,000 mark by 1910 census, which they would fail to do, but eventually make it in the 1930s and 40s. The automobile was making its way to Abilene, and John Guitar, which you know by the name of his mansions, and he had the plant seeds, would own the first automobile in Abilene, Texas. According to Duff, colleges would make a huge contribution to the building of Abilene. Simmons College, which is now Hardin-Simmons University, would be established in 1892, AC would be established in 1906, and McMurray would be established in 1923. World War II would bring troops to Abilene and mark the beginning of Dyess Air Force Base. The dice was rolling, but the town still had problems within itself. The young town had its good shares of problems and fights. They say, don't walk down First Street would be something that you'd hear from your mother telling your daughter that do not walk down South First or North First in fear of shootouts. According to Andy Adams, alcohol was a problem multiplying. Abilenians would speak their mind about that alcohol and prohibit it in 1887. Abilene went dry. And so the town of Impact was made, and according to Duff, their visible reason for for founding Impact would be to sell alcohol. There weren't just fights in the saloons. There were also landless cowmen and landed ranchers. There were the men who wanted the open range, and then the cowmen who wanted the open range, and then the ranchers who wanted to fence in their land to protect the crops. The results of this were wire cutting, which was the cowmen cutting the rancher's fence in order to get to the water much faster. The Abilene Reporter-News, which is Abilene's first newspaper, would be pro-fencing in the fact that they would go for the fencing. And they would write vigorously about it and be in a fuss with the magnetic quill, which would be anti-fencing. The Great Depression would hit us, but we could find a way to stay alive. According to Sledge, Abilene made sure to get its fair share of federal funds, and the only way we could do that was by purchasing land for Dyess Air Force Base. There had been the West Texas Baptist Sanitarium Hospital, who took care of the sick during the Great Depression. But when the Great Depression hit, they had problems financially to support. Well, here comes Mr. and Mrs. T.G. Hendricks, able to help fund the sanitarium, and later leading to renaming to Hendricks Hospital. Right before the Depression hit, Abilene was able to start adding roads and putting buildings with bricks in. One of those buildings would be the skyscraper downtown. Not everything was devastating in Abilene. There were some good times that would happen. The good times were coming, and the town was blooming. Abilene was in need of some electricity, and in order to prosper, according to Sledge, the new power plant began in 1920, but would take 2 years to build. Not only was electricity making its debut, so were the telephones in 1895. It became apparent that the town needed more than one generator, so they began a new generator, and it was added in 1926. The schools had been established and sports were the focus in the town. Abilene High would have substantial amount of success in football in the 20s, playing in 3 state championships but winning only 2, led by Pete Shotwell. Simmons would play football but would get ended due to a death of a player. It would get recontinued in 1914. Abilene would have a baseball team but would be discontinued due to the Great Depression. They were called the Eagles. The downtown area would grow into something unthought of throughout the years. In 1908, the trolleys, or the galloping gooses, as they would call it, were introduced to Abilene and put to use. Hilton would open up one of its first hotels in 1927. According to Sledge, there was enough activity in and around the county to justify the organization of Abilene Geological Society. So Abilene was a petroleum town, and that would shape Abilene in more ways than one. I hope that you learned something that you didn't know about Abilene. Those were fickle times, and our founding fathers were brave souls to start a town in a place that was technically not livable. The things that were done to make Abilene what it is today is hardly mentioned in my speech. There's much more. So the next time you're driving down North and South First, you can picture the saloons full with drunks, looking for fights